This video talks about using layers, and this layer tool is, and here's a little window for it, probably one of the more important features of Gimp, and what really separates Gimp from some of these other paint programs, and what you can do with layers. First of all, the layers window is Control L, so if you hit Control L, it'll pull up this little window. By default, it only has one background white image with a little eye here. And typically, when you paint or when you work on a photo, you're get some different color paint here. You're painting on that background layer. So even though you don't realize you're working with layers, there's actually a layer there. It's just called the background layer. So let's make it a little more interesting here. Let's use this lower left-hand corner icon. It looks like a little sheet of paper. If I click that, I can create a new layer, and I can name it and give it a size. Normally, I always give it the same size as the entire document, but you could call this red square. Sometimes I don't name it, but you can give it a name. And you want to start off with the foreground color, which in this case would be black here. The background would be white, or they give you white as an option, or transparency. I normally start with transparent, meaning don't put anything on the layer, just create it. So here you can see it's created a layer above my background layer. So now if I paint, let's paint maybe a different color here. This, you can't tell by looking at it, but this is actually not on the background. You can kind of see the little thumbnail. It's checkerboard, meaning transparent, but there's a little red right here in the middle. You can always see what a layer looks like by unchecking this eyeball here. So if I turn that off, it goes away. So I can tell that was on the red square label layer. And then I can turn off the lower one too, and you can see nothing except for the red squiggly line there. I think I named it red square because I was going to make a square out of it, so let me just make a square, a rectangle. And of course notice the red is on top of the black, and that's because the red is on top of the black here. You can rearrange these by using these arrow keys here and move it up and down. So if something's hiding something else, you can shift it up and down. You can actually create groups here. I don't use this a lot, but if you have 5 or 6 different layers, what you can do is you can put them all in one. Let's see if we move that down into this layer here. And that one, this dragging dropping does not work well with this screen capture program. But you can put a whole group of layers together and then turn their eyeball on and off at one time to maintain, or raise or lower their order in the what's covering what other layer. So let me go ahead and get rid of that because I won't need that for now. Yeah, we can't drag and drop much in this one, so delete layer. You can right click on these and get a whole menu here. Some of these are the same options. New, you can rename it, you know, if you want to change the name of it. We'll get to some of these other options later, but when it comes to moving things, turn the eyeball back on, use your move tool. It'll only move the current layer. So if you haven't figured out already, this gives you a lot of the flexibility that you had with vector software, and just the ability to click and move something. This is technically just a bunch of red dots, but because it's separate from the black, then it knows to keep it separate and to treat it differently. I can also move the background by clicking the background layer as well. Just real quickly here, a few other options. You can duplicate. So if I want several of these red squares, I can duplicate and get multiple layers. Sometimes you'll use that for, you know, if you need many bushes or something, you're trying to cover part of your image, you can, instead of cloning, you could use multiple layers. And again here, I normally would right click or drag this down to the trash can, but it won't with the software, so I'm going to right click and delete, and right click and delete that one. So we're back to where we started. A couple of things just to kind of advise before we go on to some actual applications is just make sure you know what layer you're editing on. Because by looking at it you can't tell. So if I think I'm on the red square and I start drawing, I may not realize till many minutes or hours later that that was on the same layer as the black, and now I can't move those separate. Those are on top of each other and I can't separate them. And even if I selected, one of my selection tools and move the red, it would not know what to put behind it because it's erased what was behind it with the red. So you want to make sure that you're painting on the layer you think you are. So if I'm back on this layer and you just click on the layer, it'll turn kind of a gray. It'll turn blue first, but when you click off of it, it goes to kind of a little gray color, a darker gray, so I know which layer I'm on. So that's kind of impressive how they work. Many times you'll have multiple layers. You can also lower the opacity of a layer. So if I pull this down, I can make it semi-transparent. So if you want to, and there's also a mode up here. I'm going to probably have a whole video on these modes, but you can change the way it, let me move this on top of it and kind of give you an idea of kind of what one of these does. It changes the way they mix together. These two colors are not very interesting, but sometimes they're, and I'll show you a whole video on how you can use these modes, but normally we just leave this on normal. Now I'm going to put a few images here to kind of show you how you can use. This is a banner that our church had this year, and I don't have the original, so I don't have the layers. So when I look at it, it's already been flattened to one layer, but you can still look at this. I want you to be able to kind of picture how many layers were used to create this. Layers are commonly used to have multiple images on a single document, and you can still move them around. So probably this was a layer here with the watch and the flower, 3, 4, 5 layers here. Probably this background was either one more layer, or it could have been 2 with this little square with the corners cut off. That could have been a separate layer. Could be this little design here in the background, could have been an additional layer. The words are almost always additional layer. In fact, because they're different fonts, this is probably 3 different layers, one for faithful, one for in all, and one for things. The gray here was probably a layer, Grace Baptist Church was probably a layer, and then the words at the top here were probably a layer. So, and even the color that was used to tint these different colors very possibly could have been done with different layers. So easily this could be 6, 7, 8, 10 different layers to create this, and the reason that's important is because I could then move, this image over to here, this image over there, change the tints from one image to the other if I wanted this green and this red. So layers allows you to maintain that flexibility in making changes instead of everything being flat and hard to, that way I don't have to worry about selecting, the exact image. I can just click that entire layer and move it. One last one that I'll use is, as an example, is our cover for our booklet this year. And since we did this in class, turn that off. Since we did this in class, I can actually still show you the layers and maybe see a more practical way. Now this one, I have several layers turned off. You can see they don't have the eyeballs on. That's because they were not in use. This is actually the original. Let me pull this to the top here. This is what we were trying to purchase this, but we couldn't find it. This was the original off the web, and we could not find it, and we looked for a larger resolution, and we were trying to purchase it, but we just couldn't find it, so we decided to make our own. So this is what we came up with, a little different color scheme, but notice I'm turning that off so that I don't see it. Obviously the basketball is on top, so it's the highest one. So if I turn that off, you can see what's below it. Next we have all of these starburst pattern. Don't worry about these 2 pictures here. We'll learn later about what these do. These are called layer masks. If I turn that off, you can see that turns on and off the starburst there. And then below that we have some orange dots, I believe. Notice I did not name most of these. I just call them layer. These are default names. So normally you would want to call these sunbursts and orange dots, and so and when you get 5, 10, 15 different layers, it gets a little tricky knowing what is what. And then we have some orange, this orange little blob down here at the bottom. And then lastly we had the background, which is this little dotted pattern there, and then nothing. So once you build it back up, you have your, that was the starburst before we added our kind of torn edges to it. So I think actually that was the one we used with the basketball on top. So that's kind of an example of how you would use layers, and you'll practice that more in class and how to use them. One thing I meant to mention earlier is whenever you use text, so if I want to click on the A and click and I type something, it automatically created a layer for me. So I don't have to create that, it made it for me. So just know that a new layer was created, and to move that, I want to mention this because this aggravates a lot of people. You have to click, notice how the cursor changes from that little finger pointing to the 4 arrows. Only when it's the 4 arrows will it move. If it's the hand, it's actually moving the background. So when you're moving words, just make sure you hit the actual letter, and that way you'll get the 4 arrows. So that's text, that's also a layer, and just a quick example of how you would use layers to create some larger design, composing multiple shapes and images together to create something. If this were all flattened in a paint program, it would be nearly impossible to go back and change the tint. For example, if I change this, I can go to hue and saturation, and even weeks later, I can change the background because it was kept separate as a layer. And so I think you can see the importance of how layers work there, and we'll practice more of that in class.